Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my definitive video review of the Sony 70-200mm F2.8 G Master, and this is the OSS Mark II lens. So obviously it is a follow-up to their first generation of the G Master lens covering this focal length, and I can safely say that this is a lens that is improved in every way, though it does come at a cost, and that is an extended price. Their Gold Master lenses are in their second generation, and they've come a long way in the past 6 or 7 years. This new Mark II lens is much lighter, about 29% lighter, has a much faster focus, more consistent focus, it's optically superior, it has more features. It's basically better in every way, but of course it's also very expensive, about $2,800 US, which unfortunately seems to be the going rate these days for these type of zooms on mirrorless platforms. Similar pricing from Canon and Nikon as well. So the question here is, obviously that's a lot of money, so maybe this is not a lens you can afford to begin with. But even if you can afford it, is it worth the upgrade or is it worth the purchase? Well, we're going to find out today in our definitive review right after a word from our sponsor.
Today's episode is brought to you by Phantom Wallet, the minimalist modern wallet that is now even better with the new Phantom X that is crafted from aluminum right here in Canada. It is 22% smaller and 35% lighter, while still making it easy to access your cards and money when you need them, thanks to their unique fanning mechanism. You could even customize your wallet due to its modular design, with accessories like a money clip, cash holder, ID display, and even Chipolo and AirTag tracking integration. Visit store.phantomwallet.com to check out their unique sizes, styles, and finishes that span from aluminum to wood to carbon fiber, and use code DUSTIN15 for 15% off when you're ready to check out.
So let's start by talking about the improved build and features. As noted, this lens is 29% lighter, and I will say this, it is pretty much a game changer when it comes to the reduced weight. This lens weighs in at about 1,045 grams, that's 2.3 pounds. So as noted, that's 29% lighter than the previous lens, but I have reviewed lenses in this class as heavy as 1,800 grams, and that was the Sigma 70-200 F2.8. And so we're talking about a lens that is significantly lighter. And it really does feel, I actually thought when I was handling the lens for the first time, I actually thought it was smaller as well, because there's something about it that just feels somewhat compact because the weight is so light. And it's actually about the same size as the first generation lens. It's 88 millimeters in diameter, about 3.5 inches, 200 millimeters in length, right under 8 inches there. Has a 77 millimeter front filter thread, but they have managed to shave a significant amount of weight off. And they've done that through a few things. We'll talk about the focus motors in just a moment, but they've gone to quad linear motors, and so it's a more lightweight focus system. They've also used more magnesium alloys in the body and helped to reduce things there. And then there are some optical improvements and also some new optical elements that allow them to also shave some weight. But however they accomplished it, it is significant, and we have still got a lens that is more feature-rich and also better sealed, more professional grade than what the first generation lens was. So some of those improvements include now the addition of an aperture ring, and it's an aperture ring with a lot of flexibility for how you can control aperture. You have the ability to control it in 1/3 stop to tenths. You can switch it into a clickless aperture if you want to do aperture racking, though as you'll see there's a little bit of lag there due to this being aperture by wire. But you can do racking there. You also have what they call an iris lock, which is similar to a feature that Sigma has been employing over the past year, where you have the ability to lock it either into the manual aperture position or into an automatic aperture position, just to make sure that you get no inadvertent changes. Beyond that, they've actually also increased the number of aperture blades from 9 blades to 11 blades, which gives you a more circular aperture and also allows that circular shape to be retained as it is stopped down, which you can also see from the video. Some other features here that have been added is that there are more switches on the bank of switches on the side of the lens. At the top, we have got the AF/MF switch, then followed by a useful function, which is the option to turn on a full-time DMF, or direct manual focus. I really like that because one thing that I have noted on Sonys, I've done a lot of Sony reviews at this point, I own several Sony cameras, is that I find that sometimes they're reluctant to focus on a foreground object and get stuck on the background. Having that DMF option allows me to quickly pull focus to the foreground, and after that the autofocus has no problem. And so as a byproduct, it does help to solve a persistent Sony problem for me, so it's a feature that I personally really like. Beyond that, we have got a focus limiter. Then that's followed by a couple of switches for the OSS, a basic on-off switch, and then there are 3 different modes. Mode 1 being the standard, 2 being for panning, and 3 being sometimes called an active mode, to where it does less of stabilizing the viewfinder and focuses more on just stabilizing the image itself at image capture, which allows you to follow erratic movement without the optical stabilizer getting in the way. I was unable to find a rating for the OSS here, and of course, it's basically impossible to parse out what the optical stabilizer in the lens is doing, and then what the IBIS in the camera is doing if you're shooting with cameras that are equipped, which, most all of Sony cameras these days, full-frame cameras are. And so as a byproduct, I can't tell you what is doing what. Either way, it doesn't seem to be particularly impressive, and frankly, I shot side by side at 150 millimeters using this lens, and then using the Tamron 35 to 150 millimeter, both of them at 150 millimeters, handheld, identical settings. And frankly, I didn't really see much of a difference between the two. And so the IBIS was doing basically as much with the Tamron as what, the OSS is doing here. And so, it's not necessarily the best OSS system I've seen. It gets the job done. I'm not really criticizing. I'm also saying it's not exceptional, like some of the recent systems I've seen that have really been exceptional. And so with all the exceptional things on this lens, I would say the OSS is probably not one of them. We've also upped the number of focus hold buttons to where there are 3 now, and so basically whatever position you've got the lens in, there is a focus hold button that is easy to get to there. Another improvement is when it comes to the minimum focus distance. You now have separate minimum focus distances for both the 70mm and the 200mm end, and both of them are closer. And as a byproduct, you get a higher magnification level. And so on the telephoto end, you can get as high as 0.30 times, which I will note is significantly better than either of the Canon or the Nikon options, Canon being at about 0.23 times, the Nikon being at about 0.20 times. So that's obviously a really useful thing. And if you're throwing a teleconverter on there, you can pretty quickly get into some serious pseudo-macro territory. So really a useful application for that lens. Now, helping to shave a little bit further weight, if you're wanting to use the lens handheld, you can remove the tripod foot. The collar itself is not, it's rotatable, obviously, but it is not removable, but the tripod foot itself is. All of that works really well. My only complaint about this tripod foot is it's not ARCA compatible. I find that to be a pain because then I'm sticking on another quick release plate, something to make it ARCA compatible. I just wish that it would make it ARCA compatible to begin with. Fortunately, however, unlike the Canon RF design, which is an externally zooming lens, this is fully internally zooming, and it is also fully compatible with Sony's 1.4 times and 2 times teleconverters, which again adds to the usefulness of the lens. As I mentioned previously, we have got a vastly improved autofocus system here with quad XD linear motors, XD standing for extreme dynamic. So these are high-powered focus motors that make focus changes basically instantaneous. And as you can see from this video, you can just snap from close to a distant subject with no lag in between. That obviously is going to help a lot if you're using particularly some of Sony sports type bodies. So on my Alpha 1, for example, you have no problem not only getting the 30 frames per second that the camera is capable of, but the focus is capable of keeping up as well, which is a big deal. Allows you to use this lens for sports, for example, but then in more, subtle applications like weddings or portraits, it's going to be flawless in that kind of situation. And I certainly notice very good performance when it comes to IAF detection. You can see in this shot of a squirrel up in a tree that it not only nailed focus on the eye, but the focus and the detail is exquisite in this shot. Very, very impressive. I also was impressed when it came to things like video focus pulls, which were smooth, quick, a minimal amount of focus breathing, another improvement there. Also, I saw with the hand test that it was, confident and snappy moving back and forth. Just really nothing to complain about on the autofocus front. This is one area where I think the first-party Sony lens is going to separate itself from any kind of third-party competition. Not only the fact that you can use it with teleconverters, you can get the full burst rate of your sports bodies, which you can't with a third-party lens, but also Sony's gotten really good at utilizing these XD linear motors in multiple configurations to really give you top-notch focus speed. Focus speed like I've never seen before in lenses like this. And so very, very impressive. So let's talk image quality. As you can see from these MTF charts, the MTF is fantastic. It shows near perfect performance in the center of the frame, both at 70 and 200 millimeters, and then very, very little drop off to where everything is basically up above the 80 percentile, which is really impressive in a lens like this. And so, and as we're going to see, it is very consistent in performance across the frame and across the zoom range. Let's dive in and let's take a look.
So we'll start by taking a look at this particular zoom range. This has been a long, very highly valued zoom range for obvious reasons. I mean, you can go from this type of framing and zoom in all the way to this framing, giving you a lot of focus possibilities in between. Now, for portrait work, I didn't notice until in post, it was rather bright out, that my model's eyes were closed at the 70 millimeter test, but you can see for portrait how much flexibility you have going from that kind of framing at 70 millimeters to this at 200 millimeters, and this, of course, is without me moving at all. I'm sure you can think of quite a few uses for that kind of focal range. So let's take a quick look at vignette and distortion at 70 millimeters. There is the tiniest bit of barrel distortion here at 70 millimeters. It is so minimal, though, that it's probably not even hardly worth correcting. And a minor amount of vignette. I manually corrected those with a +1 for the distortion and a +29 for the vignette. So that's about a stop in the corners. In most cases, you're really not even going to notice a stop in most situations. And obviously, there is a correction profile that you can see here that is going to take care of all of that without an issue. Now at 200 millimeters, the distortion, which is now pincushioned style, is a little bit more obvious. You can see those lines bending. Vignette remains pretty light, however, and of course this is very linear distortion, which pincushion distortion tends to be, and so easily to manually correct. Not that you'll probably ever have to manually correct it. If you decided to manually correct, it's a -5 that I use for the distortion and a +24. So again, very mild on the distortion front. However, there is a profile that will, either in camera that will correct for things, or here in post. As you can see, it does a perfectly good job of clearing anything up that might be there. This lens is very highly corrected when it comes to longitudinal chromatic aberrations. You can see before and after the plane of focus. There's really just not much there. It is very, very neutral. No issue with that. In this real-world example that's got a lot of shiny surfaces and transition points like here, you just really aren't seeing any kind of fringing at all. Along this metal edge, nothing there. And then if we look towards the background, kind of a specular highlight here, I'm just not seeing any kind of fringing there either. Now, if we take a look for lateral chromatic aberrations, nothing to see there either. You can see that there's near perfect transitions between the black and the white without any kind of fringing here along the edge of the frame. So really strong performance when it comes to corrections for typical aberrations in this lens. So let's talk lens sharpness and contrast here. As per usual, I'm testing on a 50 megapixel Sony Alpha 1. These results are shown to you at 200%. That is a daunting challenge, but this lens is well up to it. You can see in the center of the frame, you have pretty close to perfect performance right off the bat. If I pan over towards the mid frame, it looks exceptionally good already. If we drop down to this corner over here, you can see that the corner is quite good too. And there's maybe a little drop off, loss of contrast right towards that very edge of the frame, but this would be perfectly usable in real world situations. Remember, this is at 200%. If you stop on down to f4, I don't really see much of an improvement there. I'll move on to 5.6. Again, not really much of an improvement. We've kind of hit our peak performance right off the bat. I'll go on down to f8, and so if we look in the center of the frame, it looks exceptionally good, maybe even marginally better, but you're not really stopping down for increased performance. Performance is already exceptional. If we go down into here to the corner, I would say that, the corners are looking very good, but in a real-world situation, I don't think that that's even meaningfully better than what you're seeing at f2.8. Now, if we compare what we saw at 70 millimeters, which was exceptional, to what we see at 100 millimeters, we can see, if you look at this moire right here and the general contrast along here, it's just better. It's already improved looking at that. And if we move over towards the mid frame here, we can see again, there's just a little bit more pop and detail, and down here into the corner, quite a noticeable improvement in corner sharpness moving on to 100 millimeters. So again, you can get marginally more when stopping down, but you're already at incredible levels all across the frame from f2.8 on. Now, our minimum aperture is f/22 throughout the zoom range, but as you can see here, you really should avoid that if at all possible. Diffraction is going to really rob a lot of contrast and detail out of the image, and you can see how far we've dropped from the wide open performance on the left to the fully stopped down performance there on the right. So one would think that we have hit our pinnacle of performance with such an obvious improvement at 100 millimeters over what was already a fantastic performance, but 135 millimeters, I think, has even a little bit more in the tank. We can see the center looks quite similar, but if we look at other places in the frame, 135 millimeters just looks fantastically good. Just really strong performance elsewhere, and I could just see a little bit more contrast and detail as I look at other spots across the frame. And so I think that 135 millimeters may just be the high watermark. And again, you can stop down more for depth of field, but you're already getting fabulous results wide open. So we have hit what seems to be a high watermark at 135 millimeters. Is 200 millimeters going to let us down here? Well, we can see in the center of the frame, the answer is essentially no. The center looks really fantastic at 200 millimeters. It might be a very mild regression, but I don't know that you would be able to see it without them side by side. Mid-frame also looking really crisp here. And the only place where I thought there was the mildest bit of drop-off was really here in the extreme corner relative to 135 millimeters. You can see in both of these spots looking very good. On this other side, I think that the 135 millimeter result is ever so slightly, just has a little bit more sparkle to it than the 200 millimeter, but they are extremely close. So a really consistently strong performance all throughout the zoom range and, as we saw, all across the frame. So if we look at how that plays out for a portrait shot, and so this is just an available light, wide open f2.8 portrait here. And so you can see that this close for head and shoulders, which by the way, this is a great head and shoulders lens because it allows you to focus very closely and also because it's just very good. You can see that the fore-eye, the left eye here, is in really sharp detail. That's what it focused on. So after that, I stopped down to f4 just to give me a little bit more depth of field and just show you the eyelash that's there, but you can see now that there's enough depth of field for both eyes to be somewhat in focus there. Well, not somewhat, both of them look quite good. The left is still the dominant one, but it's not far off from the right. And so as a byproduct, I mean, again, use depth of field or aperture for depth of field purposes, not necessarily for sharpness. Some more real-world results here, and so here we have f5.6 at 70 millimeters. You know, obviously a scene with tons of detail and a lot of layers to it, but you can see as I pan across here, you know, again, on a 50 megapixel body, just fabulous. Just the contrast is exquisite. You're not seeing any kind of lateral chromatic aberrations that are marring the edge of the frame. And as we look towards the distance, obviously you reach a point to where there's the haze is going to limit the ability of any kind of lens to render. But what we can see here is that there is detail, you know, all across the frame as far out as you want to look. And again, with a real-world result, if we zoom into 200 millimeters, a little bit different a setting, you know, obviously here we are getting a little bit of impact of the waves over the water. And when I say waves, I'm not talking about these waves. I'm talking about the thermal waves of varying temperatures, some open water surrounded by ice. But you can still see that at 200 millimeters, the detail there is just fantastic. And if I go into a situation where, you know, those, you know, the varying pockets of thermal energy are not a problem, you can see that the detail here is just really exquisitely good. So here at 200 millimeters f2.8, just a fabulous amount of detail there. Another shot here, just a quick shot of a squirrel out, you know, on a hike. You can see the detail there is just fantastic. It's just a really crisp lens. As noted, the magnification level is nice and high, but it's not just a high magnification level. It actually performs quite well even wide open at f2.8, which makes that even far more useful. You can see there's just a lot of detail, very good contrast, a fairly flat plane of focus, all is well there. So that will allow you to really isolate a subject to where you can get a, you know, fully blurred out background, very creamy. And so that's great there. Another similar type shot here. Can see just moving outdoors that I'm really able to have, you know, just it's almost like this is just dangling out into, you know, three-dimensional space with everything else blurred out behind it, you know, due to that shallow depth of field. But I also noted that if I backed up a little bit and, not as high of magnification, here everything is not blurred out. You can see details that you didn't see in the closer 200mm shot, but neither is there anything jagged or distracting here. Overall, that is a really nice looking end result. So the bokeh quality is pretty good, I would say, for such a sharp lens. The wide open geometry is only so-so. If there's any deficiency here, it is the fact that you can see that it's really just in the very center of the frame that we're getting a fully circular shape, getting quite a bit of cat eye shape with the aperture towards the edges of the frame. Not a lot you can do about that, obviously, other than stop the lens down. And at f4, it looks a lot better for specular highlights. Now, since this lens has been released, I know that there are a number of people who, while they love the 135mm f1.8 G Master, if they're going to spend a lot of money, which both of those lenses are very expensive, they're going to choose the zoom for the versatility. And I do completely get that. I really do love the GM lens, but I mean, the fact that you can get such beautiful, kind of 3D pop and a blurred out background with this lens, and of course the flexibility of a zoom, is pretty enticing for portrait and event work. So finally, a quick look at flare resistance. And so here, just in a static shot mode, you can see that contrast is staying very good. Very, very, very mild ghosting pattern. Nothing to worry about there. Stopping down to f11, you can see the 22-pointed sun star. Slightly more defined ghosting artifacts, but it's quite an artistic pattern. And if I pan back and forth across the sun, starting here wide open, not a whole lot to see. And if I stop down to f11, it becomes a little bit more distinct where the sun is in the sky, but very little in terms of flare artifacts or ghosting or veiling. So a very, very impressive optical performance from top to bottom from this lens.
So bottom line, this is the highest performing lens of this type that I have ever used. In my opinion, it is the best lens of this kind that I've ever used. Many lenses require you to, basically have some kind of trade-off in the past. For example, I've shot with Tamron 70-200 f2.8 zooms in the past, and sometimes I would trade off, for example, maybe it didn't quite have as high of magnification, or maybe the focus was a little bit slower. Or if you're using a first-party lens, even the, renowned Canon 70-200 f2.8 Mark II, which is an exceptional lens, but it kind of reverse focus breathed. So if you were in tighter situations, you weren't really getting 70 millimeters, you were actually getting a tighter framing than that. So always there's something that you're trading off. In this case, you're really not. And the only place you're compromising is when it comes to price. But as noted, this is the going rate for these lenses. It's higher than what I think it should be, but it is what they are going for. I recognize that means that this lens is not going to be affordable to everyone. But if you can afford it, it really is the best of the bunch. It is the gold master at this point. There are cheaper alternatives, though really not a lot of them on the Sony platform. I'm frankly shocked that Sigma has not brought us a 70-200 zoom on Sony platform yet. So right now, your primary alternatives is the Tamron 70-180mm lens. It is smaller and lighter still, but, it doesn't have near the amount of features. It has a shorter focal range. Can't use it with teleconverters. It doesn't have optical stabilization built in the lens. Now, as noted previously, that may not make all that big of a difference. But at the same time, the Sony does have a lot of significant advantages over that particular lens. And outside of that, you're basically looking at the first generation GM lens, which you can have for around $2,000 at current market prices. And then Sony also has a 70-200 f4 for around $1,500. But if you want the best, you're going to have to pony up the $2,800 to get this. And if you can't afford it, it is a pretty exceptional lens, and one I suspect that could replace even some primes in your bag because the image quality is so good. And so at the end of the day, it is a lens that, is certainly making me kind of pause and say, do I really need that? Can I afford that? It's just that good. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you look in the description down below, you can find links to my full text review. Also, there are buying links there, linkage to an image gallery, links to follow myself or Craig on social media, to become a patron, to get channel merchandise. And of course, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and let the light in.